The day Adana was born was a tapestry of joy and mystery. Her mother, Ngozi, had endured a long, grueling labor, a night filled with both pain and hope. For 3 long years, she and her husband, Pais, had yearned for a child. They had prayed, they had wept, and they had sought help from hospitals, pastors, and traditional healers, always returning home with empty arms and heavy hearts. When Ngozi finally felt the first pains of labor, the entire compound erupted in celebration. Women gathered outside the small maternity room, their voices rising in songs of encouragement, while Pais paced back and forth, a whirlwind of nervous excitement. Then it happened. Adana's first cry, sharp, clear, and full of life, pierced the air. A wave of relief and joy washed over everyone. But as the nurse lifted the newborn and placed her in Ngozi's arms, a strange, heavy hush fell upon the room. The nurse's hands trembled slightly, her expression unreadable. She turned away quickly, her professional calm suddenly gone. A cold dread crept into Ngozi's voice as she asked, "What is it? Is something wrong?" The nurse just shook her head, avoiding her gaze. "She is fine," she whispered, but her unsettled eyes told a different story. Later, when the songs had faded and the well-wishers had gone home, Ngozi was finally alone with her daughter. She gently unwrapped the small bundle and examined her baby under the dim lamplight. That's when she saw it. The reason for the nurse's hesitation. Something about her child's body was not ordinary. It was a detail so strange, so unexpected, that it filled her heart with a confusing mix of fear and bewilderment. Her daughter had tiny, sharp spikes in her vaginal area. It made no sense. It was unnatural. For a long moment, Ngozi sat frozen in silence, her newborn sleeping peacefully against her chest, oblivious to the storm raging within her mother. Then, she pulled her closer and whispered into her tiny ear, "You are still my miracle. You are mine, no matter what." When Pais came in, his face beaming with a father's pride, Ngozi couldn't bring herself to tell him the full truth. She simply said, "Our child is different, but she is ours, and we will love her fiercely." He saw the worry in her eyes, but chose to focus on the blessing. Tears welled up as he nodded in agreement. After 3 years of agonizing waiting, he refused to let fear steal this long-awaited joy. In that moment, they made a silent pact. Adana would be cherished and protected. They would tell no one about her secret. To the world, she would be their perfect, long-awaited daughter, healthy, bright, and deeply loved. But that first night, sleep was a distant stranger to Ngozi. She lay awake beside Adana's crib, her eyes fixed on the tiny chest rising and falling with each soft breath. The pure joy she'd felt just hours before had curdled into a relentless storm of unease. Every time she closed her eyes, the startling image flashed in her mind. The difference she couldn't understand or explain. She kept whispering to herself, a desperate mantra, "She is fine. She is my child. She is fine." But her heart refused to be calm. As the lantern flame flickered and cast dancing shadows on the wall, a forgotten memory surfaced, creeping into her thoughts from a place she had long buried it. It was from a market day, years before she was married. She was buying palm oil when a woman walked past with a crying baby strapped to her back. The child's skin was covered in unusual, hard-looking patches. It was a sight so jarring that Ngozi, in a moment of youthful ignorance, had laughed softly and whispered to her friend, "Ihia, who knows what kind of spirit-born child this one is?" The memory struck her with the force of a physical blow. The casual cruelty of her past words now echoed in the silent room, a haunting reminder of a judgment she had once passed so easily. The day Adana came home from the hospital, her mother, Ngozi, held her closer than most mothers did. She wouldn't let the neighbors carry her, not even for a moment. When women from the compound gathered to coo over the newborn, Ngozi would smile, but she kept them at a distance. "She's sleeping," she'd whisper, or "She just finished feeding." The excuses were always ready, a gentle but firm wall around her child. She remembered a day long before Adana was born, a memory she had tried to bury. She had seen a mother with a child who was different, and Ngozi, young and careless, had laughed. The mother had turned, her eyes filled with a pain that still haunted Ngozi. Her voice trembled as she said, "Woman, do not laugh. What you mock today, you may one day carry in your own arms." Ngozi had brushed off the words then, embarrassed but defiant. She never saw the woman again. But now, sitting beside her own newborn, that memory returned with a suffocating weight. Her heart hammered against her ribs. God, is this my punishment? She whispered into the quiet of the room. Did my careless words bring this upon my child? Tears streamed down her face as she reached for Adana's tiny, perfect hand. You are innocent, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. You did nothing wrong. If anyone is to bear the blame, let it be me. She prayed until the first light of dawn broke through the window, begging for forgiveness, for mercy, for some kind of understanding. When her husband found her, she was still awake, rocking the baby gently, singing an old lullaby her own mother used to sing when storms gathered outside. From that day forward, Ngozi became fiercely protective of Adana. She never spoke of what she remembered, but in her heart, she carried the knowledge. Some words, once spoken, live longer than we can ever imagine. And so she vowed that her daughter would never be laughed at, never be pitted, never be made to feel anything less than perfect, even if it meant carrying the secret all by herself. When Adana began to crawl, Ngozi followed her everywhere, a constant, watchful shadow. While other children in the compound played outside, their joyful shouts echoing under the afternoon sun, Adana sat in the shade, watching. If anyone asked why she didn't join them, Ngozi would offer a practiced smile and say, "She's delicate. I don't want her to catch a cold." But it wasn't a cold she feared. It was eyes. Curious eyes, prying eyes, and careless words. The kind that could wound a child without even meaning to. Even as a baby, Ngozi never let anyone else change Adana's diapers. Not her sisters, not her mother-in-law, not even her own husband. "I will do it," she'd insist, her voice gentle but unyielding. At first, people chalked it up to the anxieties of a first-time mother. But as the years passed, her caution didn't soften, it deepened. By the time Adana turned 5, she began to notice the invisible lines her mother drew around her. At the stream, while other little girls splashed and giggled in the water, her mother kept her wrapped tightly in a towel, whispering, "No, my child. You will bathe at home." At school, when the children changed for sports, Ngozi made a special arrangement with the teacher. Adana would change alone, in the privacy of a small corner in the staff room. Adana didn't understand why. She only knew that her mother loved her with a fierce, all-encompassing love, but that love came wrapped in layers of silence and secrecy. Sometimes, her curiosity would get the better of her. "Mummy, why can't I play in the water like Amaka and Ifeoma?" she'd ask. Ngozi would just smile softly, stroking her cheek. "Because you are special, Ada M," she would reply. "Some things about you are not for everyone to see." That answer both comforted and confused her. It made her feel cherished, but it also planted a seed of doubt. She began to believe there was something hidden about her, something that made her different, something she had to protect at all costs, even if she didn't know what it was. As she grew, this unspoken rule shaped her personality, like water slowly carving a path through stone. She learned to hide, to keep her distance, to cover herself not just with clothes, but with a quiet, reserved demeanor. The secrecy became a shadow that followed her from childhood into her teenage years, a gentle, constant, and unyielding presence. She didn't yet know what her mother feared so deeply. She only knew that in their home, love was always accompanied by a profound silence. And deep down, even as a child, she sensed that one day, she would have to uncover the reason for herself. By the time Adana entered secondary school, she was a quiet girl with watchful, intelligent eyes. She was polite, brilliant in her studies, and obedient, the kind of student teachers loved to praise. Her classmates, however, sometimes teased her for being too serious. But beneath that composed exterior, she carried a weight she could never explain to anyone. Her mother's warnings from childhood had become a permanent echo in her mind. "Stay away from boys. Don't let anyone touch you. You are different, Adana. Promise me you'll always protect yourself." These phrases had built a fortress around her heart. While her friends started talking about crushes and giggling about boys, Adana stayed on the sidelines. She was friendly but distant, never letting anyone get too close. The boys in her class found her intriguing but untouchable. They'd try to talk to her, but her reserved nature was like a polite but firm wall. One afternoon, a boy named Emeka, who was popular and kind, tried to start a conversation after class. "Adana, you did really well on the math test," he said with a warm smile. Maybe you could help me study sometime? For a moment, Adana felt a flutter of something new and exciting. She almost smiled back, almost said yes. But then her mother's voice flooded her mind. Protect yourself. Her face immediately became a mask of cool politeness. I'm very busy, she replied, turning away before he could see the conflict in her eyes. Emika looked surprised and a little hurt. Adana felt a pang of regret, but the fear her mother had instilled in her was stronger. The shame of her own body, a body she had never been allowed to fully see or understand, was a constant burden. She showered in the dark, changed her clothes quickly, and never looked at herself in the mirror for too long. She felt like she was living in a stranger's skin. The secret her mother was protecting had become her own prison. As she navigated the confusing world of adolescence, her mother's protectiveness only intensified. Ngozi would inspect her clothes, question her friendships, and remind her daily of the dangers that lay outside their home. What started as love now felt like control. Adana began to resent the silence, the endless rules, the feeling that she was being kept in the dark about her own life. The breaking point came when she was 16. Her school was organizing a cultural day, and all the girls in her class were excited to perform a traditional dance. It involved beautiful, flowing costumes and graceful movements. Adana loved to dance. In the privacy of her room, she would move to music, feeling a freedom she never felt anywhere else. She desperately wanted to be a part of it. When she told her mother, Ngozi's face grew tight with anxiety. No, she said, her voice sharp. You will not participate. But why, Mummy? Adana pleaded, her voice trembling with frustration. All my friends are doing it. It's just a dance. I said no, Adana. You are not like other girls. The words hit Adana like a physical blow. Not like other girls. What does that even mean? You've been telling me that my whole life. What is so different about me that I have to hide from the world? Tears welled up in her eyes. Tears of anger and years of confusion. I'm tired of the secrets, Mummy. I'm tired of feeling like there's something wrong with me. You have to tell me. What are you hiding? Ngozi looked at her daughter, at the beautiful, fierce young woman she had become, and saw the pain she had inadvertently caused. The secret she had carried for so long, a burden she thought she was carrying for her daughter, was now the very thing tearing them apart. Her own resolve began to crumble under the weight of her daughter's desperate plea. The silence that had defined their lives for 16 years was finally about to break. At first, those words were easy to obey. But as she grew older, they began to sting. Her classmates would whisper and giggle about crushes and love letters. They compared notes about who liked whom, about first touches and teenage dreams. Adana smiled when they did, but something in her heart sank. Late at night, in the dormitory, she would lie awake listening to the other girls talk about love. Sometimes she would touch her own chest, feeling her heartbeat race with both longing and fear. She already knew, deep down, that there was something about her that set her apart. Something she had seen, something she couldn't unsee. She didn't understand it fully, but she knew it wasn't what others called normal. That knowledge became her invisible armor. It made her cautious, distant, disciplined. When a boy once tried to talk to her after assembly, she smiled politely and walked away. Her friends laughed. Adana, you don't even look at him twice. Don't you like boys at all? She just shrugged. My mother says I should face my books. But what she didn't say was that she wasn't sure she could ever let anyone close enough to see her whole self. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. At 15, she began to understand what loneliness really was. Not the absence of people, but the constant presence of a secret. Her mother's words echoed in her mind whenever she looked in the mirror. Some gifts are not for everyone's eyes. So Adana built her life around silence. She studied hard. She kept her faith strong. She smiled when others spoke of love, pretending she understood. But deep inside, she wondered, not for the first time, if the strange thing she carried was a curse or a kind of protection she had yet to understand. By the time Adana reached senior secondary school, her reputation had already taken root like an old tree. Every boy in the compound, every girl in her class, knew one thing about her. Adana was not the kind of girl you joked with. It wasn't because she was harsh or proud. Far from it. She was polite, respectful, and soft-spoken. She greeted her teachers properly, helped younger students carry their books, and sang beautifully in the school choir. But there was a quiet distance around her, an invisible fence everyone could feel but no one could name. Boys in her class often joked in low tones, "Forget that one. Adana? No-go area." Some said she was too holy. Others said she was too proud. A few whispered that she had taken some kind of vow. No one dared approach her twice. She never joined the secret love notes passed between desks. She never laughed at the love poems scrawled on the back of exercise books. If a boy said something playful, she would simply smile gently and walk away, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet certainty. Her classmates soon learned to respect her boundaries. Some even admired her. When a new girl once asked, "Why doesn't Adana have a boyfriend?" another replied, "Because she's not like us. She's different." And it was true, though none of them knew how deep that difference went. To Adana, keeping her distance wasn't only obedience to her mother's warning, it was safety. She carried inside her a mystery she didn't fully understand, something she believed could never be shared. So she poured herself into her studies. She won prizes in literature and biology. Teachers called her focused, disciplined, a girl with a bright future. Yet, late at night, when the dormitory was dark and quiet, she would sometimes feel the ache of her own walls. She wondered what it felt like to be ordinary, to laugh freely, to love openly, to be touched without fear. But she always pushed the thought away, because she had learned early that secrets and survival sometimes meant the same thing. And so, as the world of teenage love bloomed around her, Adana remained on the edges, calm, graceful, and untouchable, a mystery the boys could never solve and the girls could never fully understand. University life was a new rhythm, new faces, new freedoms. No one to tell her when to come home, no mother's voice echoing in her ear. For the first time, Adana could breathe on her own. Yet the silence she carried within her came along too. In her first year, she shared a small hostel room with two lively girls, Chinaza and Tommy, who seemed to live for laughter. They spent hours dressing up, taking pictures, talking about love. They called Adana Madame Calm. "You don't like stress, eh?" Chinaza teased once. "You're just here for book and prayer." Adana smiled. It was easier to let people think she was simply shy or deeply religious. The real story was far more complicated and far lonelier. One evening, as Adana sat on her bed reading, Chinaza and Tommy were getting ready for a party. The room buzzed with the scent of perfume and the sound of their excited chatter. "Adana, are you sure you won't come?" Tommy asked, adjusting her earrings. "It will be fun. There's this guy, Emeka, from engineering. You should see him." Adana shook her head, her smile unwavering. "You girls go and have fun. I have a test on Monday." Chinaza sighed dramatically. "One day, we will drag you out of this room. This Madame Calm routine has to end." They laughed and left, their voices fading down the corridor. The room suddenly felt vast and empty. The silence was louder than their laughter had been. Adana put her book down. She walked to the small window and looked out at the campus grounds, where groups of students were walking, their silhouettes vibrant against the evening lights. She felt a familiar pang in her chest, a mix of yearning and resolve. She was safe in her silence, yes, but she was also alone. The walls she had built so carefully were becoming a prison. She knew something had to change. She just didn't know how, or if she was brave enough to tear them down. That night, Adana didn't open her textbook. She just sat by the window, watching the world move on without her. And for the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of her loneliness. It was in her second year that she met David. He was in her literature class, a quiet boy with thoughtful eyes who always sat near the back. He didn't try to flirt or make grand gestures. He just spoke about books with a passion that mirrored her own. One afternoon after a lecture on African poetry, he walked beside her. "You made a really interesting point about Okigbo's symbolism," he said, his voice calm. Adana was surprised. Most boys either ignored her or tried too hard. David just talked to her. "Thank you," she replied, a genuine smile reaching her eyes. "I find his work fascinating." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Me too. Maybe we could study together sometime? For the midterms." Adana's first instinct was to say no. It was the safe, familiar response. But then she remembered the lonely night by the window. She remembered the ache in her chest. She looked at David, who was waiting patiently, not pushy, not demanding. She saw no threat in his eyes, only sincere interest. Taking a deep breath, she broke her own rule. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that." His smile was small but warm, and it felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, cold winter. They exchanged numbers, and as she walked back to her hostel, a strange, fluttering feeling filled her heart. It wasn't just fear. It was hope. Their study sessions became a regular thing. They would meet at the library, their books spread out between them. They talked about poems and novels, but soon, they started talking about other things too. About Jejic dreams, their families, their fears. Adana found herself opening up in ways she never had before. With David, she didn't feel the need to pretend. He listened, really listened, and he shared his own vulnerabilities. He told her about his struggle with anxiety, about his passion for music. For the first time, someone saw past the walls and seemed interested in the person hiding behind them. She still held her biggest secret close, but the space it occupied in her heart was slowly shrinking, making room for this new, warm connection. One evening, as they were packing up their books, David looked at her, his expression serious. Adana, he began, I really enjoy spending time with you, more than just as a study partner. Her heart started pounding. The old fear crept back in. This was it, the moment she always ran from. He must have seen the panic in her eyes, because he quickly added, Hey, it's okay. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. I'm not going to push you. He gave her that same gentle smile and said goodnight. Adana stood frozen for a moment. He wasn't pushing. He was giving her space. He was respecting her boundaries, even the ones he didn't understand. As she walked home, she realized her fear was mixed with something else, a powerful, overwhelming desire not to lose this person who made her feel seen. The walls were still there, but for the first time, she had found someone who made her want to find the door. As weeks turned into months, the campus grew familiar. Boys tried to win her affection, as boys always do. Some brought flowers, others told jokes, and a few even recited poems they barely understood. Adana thanked them all politely, but she never accepted their advances. Soon, a new nickname began to spread quietly around campus, Iron Lady. It wasn't because she was cold, but because no one could get close enough to melt her guard. To the rest of the world, she looked strong, unbothered, and completely self-contained. But in the privacy of her room, she would sometimes stand before her mirror, touching her reflection as if to ask, who am I really protecting myself from? Then, in her second year, she met Keen. He was a quiet, intelligent student who didn't treat her like a mystery to be solved. He spoke to her like an equal, not someone to be conquered, but someone to be understood. He was patient. He didn't flirt. He simply listened. They studied together in the library, their books spread out under the soft, golden light. They would walk back to the hostel at dusk, sharing stories about their families, their dreams, and the kind of people they hoped to become. For the first time, Adana felt something she hadn't known before, safety. Not the guarded, careful safety of her silence, but the gentle, warm kind that comes from truly being seen by someone else. One evening, as they sat beneath a blooming jacaranda tree, Keen said quietly, You always seem like you're guarding something. You don't have to tell me what it is. I just want you to know, whatever it is, it doesn't make you less. His words shook her more than she expected. That night, she lay awake in her small hostel bed, staring at the ceiling, his voice replaying in her mind. For years, she had believed her difference was something shameful, something to hide, a secret no one could ever understand. But for the first time, she began to wonder if it might simply be a part of her story, not a curse, not a secret, just a part of her truth. Her mother still called often, her voice a mix of love and quiet worry. Adana, remember what I told you. Stay away from distractions. Adana would smile softly, her heart a tangle of conflicting emotions. Yes, Mama, I remember. But deep down, she also remembered Keen's words. It doesn't make you less. Adana and Keen's friendship grew quietly, like a tree no one notices until it begins to bloom. They spent long evenings studying together, and Keen would bring her snacks, roasted groundnuts, or sometimes suya wrapped in newspaper. She'd laugh softly and say, You'll spoil me with all these things. He never pushed her. He was kind, patient, and always careful with her boundaries. Over time, their friendship deepened into something tender. They began to sit a little closer, talk a little longer, and share smaller, more personal things. When Keen finally told her, I like you, Adana, she didn't run. She only smiled shyly and said, I know. They began dating quietly. It wasn't the loud, public kind of love that everyone flaunted on social media, but a quiet companionship that made her feel seen and safe. They walked hand in hand after lectures. They met under their jacaranda tree every evening. Sometimes, when the air was still and the sun was fading, Keen would hold her close, his warmth steady and calm. She allowed that. The closeness, the hugs, the kisses on her forehead, and sometimes, softly, on her lips. But never more than that. Whenever he tried to draw her nearer, she would gently stop him, shaking her head with an apologetic smile. Keen, please. I can't. He would sigh but never complain. It's okay, he'd say, brushing her cheek with his thumb. I'm not in a hurry. Adana was so grateful for his patience. She had never met anyone like him. Still, she could feel his quiet curiosity growing, like a question he was afraid to ask. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her differently, not with frustration, but with wonder, as if trying to understand the invisible wall that stood between them. One evening, as they walked back from class, Keen finally said softly, Adana, can I ask you something? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. She looked at him, her heart pounding. Why are you so afraid to let me in? Did someone hurt you before? Her throat tightened. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, No one hurt me. I'm just not like other girls. Keen stopped walking. What does that mean? Adana shook her head, her eyes downcast. It's not something I can explain. He didn't press her further. He only took her hand gently and said, Then one day, when you're ready, tell me. Until then, I'll wait. They stood in silence for a while, the wind rustling the trees around them. In that moment, Adana realized how deeply she cared for him, maybe more than she had ever intended to. But she also knew that love, no matter how patient, would one day demand the truth she'd spent her whole life hiding. By Adana's final year, her world with Keen had become as familiar as breathing. They still met under the jacaranda tree. They still talked for hours. But something in their rhythm had changed. For years, Keen had been patient, believing that time would eventually loosen the invisible lock she kept around her heart. But as the months turned into years, his friends began to talk. Guy, you day waste your time, they'd say. Nah book you, and that girl day read since 200 level. Another would joke. She go marry pastor, leave you stranded. At first, Keen just laughed them off. But their voices started to follow him. To lectures, to the hostel, even into his own private thoughts. He began to notice things he hadn't before. How Adana always avoided too much physical closeness. How she would flinch if he held her hand for too long. How she never stayed out late with him. He loved her deeply, but he was also starting to feel tired and confused. He felt he had done everything a man in love could do. He helped her pay her departmental dues. He bought her textbooks. When she fell sick once, he even left his own exams to stay with her at the clinic. His friends saw all this and mocked him quietly. You don't turn moo-moo for that girl, oh. You think love go fill your pocket? The pressure mounted. Keen was caught between his unwavering love for Adana and the growing chorus of doubts from his friends and his own mind. He had waited so long. But patience has its limits, and a heart can only stay confused for so long before it starts to ache for answers. The quiet, safe world they had built together was starting to show cracks, and the question of Adana's secret loomed larger than ever before. He knew he had to do something, but he was terrified that pushing for the truth might be the very thing that would push her away forever. What would he do? And what was the secret Adana was guarding so fiercely? Stick around for the next part of this story to find out. The laughter stung more than he admitted. One afternoon, they met in their usual place, a quiet bench near the faculty garden. Keen looked worn out. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Adana, he said finally, I've tried. I've really tried. But I don't know how long I can keep waiting for something I don't understand. She froze. Keen, what are you saying? He rubbed his palms together, looking away. I love you. You know that. But you keep a wall between us. Not just with touch, but with everything. I feel like I'm in love with someone who's half present. And people are starting to think I'm a fool. His voice broke a little at the end. Adana felt her chest tighten. For years, she had feared this moment. The moment love demanded an explanation she couldn't give. She wanted to tell him everything. About her secret, about the strange spikes she had carried since birth, about the fear that ruled her life. But the words wouldn't come. The shame was too heavy. She whispered, Keen, please. Don't listen to them. I'm just not ready. He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. That's the problem, Adana. I don't think you'll ever be. He rose, gave her one last look, part love, part defeat, and walked away. That night, Adana cried quietly into her pillow. The wall she had built to protect herself had finally cost her the one person who had truly tried to see her. The weeks after Keen left felt like walking through fog. Adana went to lectures, smiled when she needed to, spoke when spoken to, but inside, she was hollow. Everything that used to bring her peace now reminded her of him. The quiet benches, the sound of pages turning, even the scent of rain after class. She stopped answering calls. She avoided her friends. When her mother phoned, she would force a cheerful voice. "I'm fine, Mama." But she wasn't. The pain of losing Keen was sharp, but beneath it lay a deeper ache, the ache of secrecy. She was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of living half a life. And one night, as she sat alone in her small room, she made a decision. She would go home. She would demand answers. When she arrived at their family house in Enugu, her mother was surprised and instantly concerned. "Adana, you didn't even call before traveling. Is everything all right?" Adana dropped her bag and looked at her mother, eyes glistening. "Mama, I need you to tell me the truth." Ngozi froze. "Truth about what?" "About me." There was silence. The ceiling fan hummed softly. "All my life," Adana continued, her voice trembling, "you've made me hide, made me afraid. You said I was different, that I should stay away from people, from boys. But you never told me why. Mama, I've lost someone I love because of this secret. What's wrong with me?" Ngozi's lips parted, but no words came. "Mama, please." Adana's voice broke. "I need to know why I was born this way." Ngozi turned away, her shoulders shaking. For a long moment, the only sound was her quiet sobbing. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, heavy with years of guilt. "Adana, there are things a mother hopes her child will never have to know. Then I deserve to know them now," Adana whispered. Ngozi sat down slowly, motioning for her daughter to sit beside her. "When I was young," she began, "I made a mistake. A woman in our village gave birth to a strange child, a child people feared. I laughed. I mocked her pain. That night, she came to my dreams. She said, 'The day you have your first daughter, she will bear what you have mocked.'" Adana's breath caught. "I thought it was just a dream," Ngozi continued, her eyes distant. "Until the day you were born." Her voice trembled. "When I saw you, I remembered her words. I was terrified, but you were still my child, Adana. I couldn't let the world see or judge you. So I hid you, not because I was ashamed of you, but because I wanted to protect you." Adana stared at her, tears running freely now. "You mean, all this time, all this pain, it was because of a curse?" Ngozi reached for her hand, crying. "It wasn't your fault. It was mine. I brought it upon us. I thought if I kept you safe and pure, maybe it would break. But I was wrong." They sat in silence, mother and daughter, both weeping, one for the guilt of the past, the other for the weight of a secret she never chose to bear. That night, Adana couldn't sleep. Her mother's words echoed through her mind like a haunting melody. "You will bear what you have mocked." And for the first time, she truly understood. Her difference, the very thing she had hated and tried so hard to hide, was never about shame. It was about a curse, an old wound passed from one woman's pain to another's. But as the fear settled in her bones, Adana also knew something else, something powerful. Curses only have power as long as we are afraid of them. And she was done being afraid. She was ready to fight. After that night, everything changed. Adana could no longer sit still. Knowing the truth didn't bring her peace. It gave her a burning need to make things right. She decided she had to find the woman her mother had mocked all those years ago, the one whose pain had turned into a curse that now defined her own life. Her mother, Ngozi, warned her gently, her voice full of a mother's worry. "My daughter, that woman must be very old by now. Or perhaps she's already gone." But Adana's resolve was like steel. "Mama, if she's alive, I will find her. If she's not, then I'll find a way to make peace with her spirit." Ngozi nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She knew there was no stopping her daughter this time. The fire she saw in Adana's eyes was one she hadn't seen before. Adana began her search in her mother's hometown, Obioma, a quiet village surrounded by thick forests and roads the color of red earth. The air there smelled of rain and history, a place where the past felt alive, breathing alongside the present. She asked everyone she could find, the old women selling yams at the market, the elders sitting in the shade of ancient mango trees, even the children running errands for palm wine tappers. Do you remember a woman who had a strange child long, long ago? At first, people just shook their heads. Some frowned, their faces wrinkled in deep thought, trying to reach back into the forgotten corners of their memory. Then, one frail old man, his back bent like a bow from a lifetime of work, spoke slowly, his voice raspy with age. "Ah, you mean Mama on Yubiko. The woman who left the village many years ago. People said she went to live near the river after her child died." Adana's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. "Which river?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Ajani River," he said, pointing a shaky finger. "Down past the old footpath. But that was a long, long time ago, my daughter. I don't think anyone has seen her in decades." Despite his warning, Adana went. The path to the river was quiet and overgrown with weeds and whispering leaves. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. With every step, the sound of water grew louder, a soft, rhythmic murmur that seemed to be calling her name. When she finally reached the riverbank, she stood still, staring at the rippling water. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the surface. She took a deep breath and whispered into the wind, her voice trembling. "Mama on Yubiko, if you are alive, please hear me. If your spirit still lingers here, please forgive my mother, and forgive me." Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "We didn't know your pain. We didn't understand. But it has followed us for years. I want to end it. I want to be free." The river was silent for a moment. Then, a soft breeze rose, rustling the leaves in the trees above. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight, as though something unseen had heard her plea. Adana knelt down by the water's edge. She poured a libation, not with palm wine or with blood, but with clean water from her own bottle, a simple, pure offering of peace. For a long time, she stayed there, praying from the deepest part of her soul. When she finally rose to leave, a profound calm, unlike anything she had ever known, settled in her heart. She returned home, exhausted but lighter. For a while after that visit to the river, Adana lived as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Her dreams were quiet, peaceful. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She began to believe, to truly hope, that the curse had finally ended. She went back to her life in the city, feeling confident, calm, and renewed. The future felt bright again. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with strange dreams. A voice calling her name from the darkness, a shadow standing by her door that would vanish the moment she started to pray. Then came the feeling, a familiar, unsettling one she thought she had left behind at the riverbank. It was a stirring within her, something unexplainable, like a secret that refused to rest. At first, she tried to ignore it. "It's just stress," she told herself over and over. "I've carried this fear for so long. It's just my mind playing tricks on me." But deep down, she knew something was still wrong. The river had quieted her spirit, but it had not erased the mark she was born with. The peace was temporary. The story wasn't over. It was during this time of confusion and quiet fear that she met Chijioke. He was a man unlike any she had ever known, and he came into her life as though he had been waiting for her all along. They met at a friend's wedding. He was warm, kind, and had a strange, unshakable confidence in the way he spoke to her. When he looked at her, it wasn't with simple curiosity or admiration. It was with certainty. After only a few hours of talking, he said quietly, his voice gentle but firm, "Adana, you may not believe this, but you are my wife." She laughed softly, thinking he was just being charming, maybe a little bold. "You just met me, and you're already talking about marriage?" But Chijioke only smiled, a knowing, patient smile. "Some things," he said, "you don't need time to know." His words unsettled her, not because they were forward, but because they felt oddly familiar, as if they came from a place beyond logic, from a truth she was yet to understand. She felt a strange pull towards him, a sense of recognition that she couldn't explain. Who was this man, and why did it feel like he already knew the deepest secrets of her heart? Her journey for freedom had taken an unexpected turn, and she was beginning to realize that the fight was far from over. In fact, it might have just begun. If you're captivated by Adana's story and want to find out what happens next, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. From the very first day, Chijioke's persistence startled Adana. He didn't try to win her over the way other men had. There were no games, no half-hearted promises, just this unshakable certainty. He'd call her every single morning just to ask how she was doing. Some evenings, he would just show up at her office gate, holding food from her favorite restaurant. If she ignored his messages, he didn't get angry. He would simply send her prayers and well wishes instead. At first, she brushed it off as a simple infatuation. She even told her friend Tommy, "He'll get tired soon." Men always do when they don't get what they want. But weeks turned into months, and Chijioke's determination didn't waver. He was patient, yet completely relentless, like someone following a map that only he could see. Whenever she tried to explain that she wasn't ready for a new relationship, he would just smile quietly and say, "Adana, you can keep running, but I'll still be here. I'm not chasing for pleasure. I'm following a purpose." His words were unsettling. They reminded her of that strange, powerful pull she'd felt from the moment they met. Something deep, familiar, almost ancient. She tried her best to create distance. She stopped picking up his calls. She told him she needed space, time to be alone. But somehow, he always seemed to appear, not in an intrusive way, but with the uncanny timing of someone guided purely by intuition. One time, she saw him waiting outside her church after a Wednesday service. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, a mix of amusement and unease in her voice. He just shrugged softly. "I just knew I should come." He looked at her with a kind of reverence that made her heart tremble. "You don't understand yet," he said gently, his voice full of meaning. "But you will. You're part of something much bigger than you think." Adana just stared at him, unsure if she should feel flattered or completely terrified. No one had ever pursued her like this. No one had ever looked at her as if losing her would be like losing the very air he breathed. And even though a part of her screamed to run, that same protective instinct that had served her well her whole life, another, quieter part wanted to stay. It wanted to stay long enough to understand why this man, this stranger, felt so certain. Because deep inside her, something was stirring again. That same invisible energy she'd felt at the river, that same ancient weight that had haunted her since birth. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt it rise every single time Chijioke was near. In the weeks that followed, he became this quiet, steady presence in her life. He was gentle, he was caring, but he always watched her with an intensity she just couldn't quite figure out. It was like he understood all her deepest fears without her ever having to say a single word. And whenever she tried to pull away, to keep her distance, he would just say softly, "You've run long enough, Adana. Whatever you carry, you don't have to fight it alone." Those words hit her like a physical blow. No one, not even her ex, Keen, had ever spoken to her with such understanding. And even though she tried to keep her heart heavily guarded, she couldn't help but feel that somehow, this man saw her true self, the part she always kept hidden. He saw her truth without her needing to hide it. But as their closeness grew, strange things started happening again. There were whispers in the dead of night, shadows flickering at her window, and that constant, uneasy feeling that something unseen was watching her every move. It was as if the part of her she thought she had buried deep down had been awakened once more, responding to something in Chijioke's words, or maybe something within Chijioke himself. And deep inside her, a quiet, familiar fear began to rise. What if the curse had never truly left her? What if it had only been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to return? For a long, long time, Adana fought her feelings for Chijioke. She put up every wall she had. But there was something about his steadiness, his unwavering faith, and his quiet, consistent care that slowly began to wear down her defenses. His love wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't try to impress her with expensive gifts or flowery words. He simply showed up, every single day, through every season, like the sunlight that refuses to stop rising, no matter how dark the night was before. And so, after months of watching him, praying, and desperately trying to silence her own fears, Adana finally let him in. She surrendered. They started spending their weekends together, doing simple things. They'd go to the market, cook together, and laugh about the little, silly things in life. For the first time in so many years, she felt almost normal. She felt like a regular person, free from the shadow that had always followed her. He treated her with an incredible amount of patience, never rushing her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He seemed to understand her silences, the way her eyes would sometimes grow distant, lost in a place he couldn't see. But even as she smiled beside him, feeling a happiness she never thought possible, there was always that shadow lurking at the edge of her heart. It was the old, deep-seated fear that no love, no matter how strong, could ever survive the truth she carried. One evening, they were sitting in her small living room after dinner. The power had gone out, a common occurrence, and only a single candle flickered between them, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Chijioke was talking softly about his family, his childhood, when she suddenly interrupted him. Her voice was low, almost trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked up immediately, his expression shifting to one of deep concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated. The words felt like stones caught in her throat, heavy and impossible to get out. "You think I've been pushing people away just because I'm afraid of love," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "But it's so much more than that." He waited, as patient as ever, giving her the space she needed to find her courage. "Since the day I was born," she continued, the words finally tumbling out, "I've carried something inside me, something I don't understand. My mother says it came from a curse, from a mistake she made long before I was born." The tears she'd been holding back for so long finally started to fill her eyes, blurring the candlelight. It's like there are thorns in my spirit, something sharp and painful. I have spikes growing in my private part." The confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. "I've chased away every man who ever tried to love me because of it," she whispered, the tears now streaming down her face. "I was so afraid they'd see it, or feel it, and then they'd run. You're the only one who's ever stayed this long, and I'm so scared. I'm so scared you'll leave too, once you know." The room was silent, save for her quiet sobs. Then, Chijioke reached across the small table, his hand finding hers in the dim light. He held it firmly. His eyes, when she finally looked up, were soft and completely unshaken. There was no fear, no disgust, only a profound sense of love and understanding. He looked at her, and in that moment, she knew. He wasn't going anywhere. "Adana," he said quietly, "whatever those thorns are, they're not you. They're what the world placed on you. But I see beyond them." Her tears fell freely now, tracing paths down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Every time I think I'm free, the curse finds a way to return. It always comes back." "Then let me fight it with you," he whispered back, his voice a steady anchor in her storm. That night, long after he had left, Adana sat by the window. The moonlight traced silver paths across her floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It was a terrifying cocktail of hope and fear. She had finally spoken her truth aloud, revealed the darkest secret she carried, and someone had not run away. But even as that fragile hope took root, the old fear whispered from the shadows of her mind. Asterisk, what if the curse does not want to be broken? What if it's a part of you now? Asterisk, after that night, something changed between Adana and Chijioke. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a series of quiet, steady realignments, like the slow turning of the earth toward the sun. He became even more intentional, his care a gentle, persistent presence in her life. He started praying with her every morning before work, their voices a quiet murmur over the phone, a shield against the coming day. He called her in the evenings, not to pry or to question, but simply to remind her to eat, to take care of herself. When the nightmares returned, the old ones filled with suffocating shadows and insidious whispers, he stayed on the phone, his calm breathing a lullaby until she drifted back to sleep, safe in the sound of his presence. Chijioke never mentioned her confession again. He didn't label her, didn't analyze her pain. He simply acted as though her thorns were a burden they could carry together, a challenge they could face side by side. He treated it not as a flaw in her, but as a battle to be won. And for the first time in her life, Adana began to believe it might be possible to love and be loved, not in spite of what she carried, but with it. The idea that someone could see all of her, thorns and all, and still choose to stay, was a revolutionary concept. But the peace was fragile, a delicate truce that didn't last. Strange things began to happen again, as if the darkness she carried was fighting back against the light he brought into her life. Whenever she and Chijioke prayed together over the phone, the lights in her apartment would flicker and dim, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. At night, she'd sometimes feel an icy cold wind pass through her room, even when the windows were sealed shut against the night air. It was a chilling, invasive presence that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. One night, the feeling was more than just a passing chill. She woke up gasping for air, a heavy, crushing weight pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. It was an immense, invisible pressure suffocating her. In a sheer moment of terror, she cried out his name, Chijioke. The moment his name left her lips, the weight vanished. She was left panting in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs, the silence of her room now feeling more menacing than ever. When she told him the next morning, her voice shaking, he didn't laugh or dismiss her. He didn't even look afraid. He just listened, his expression serious and compassionate. Then, he took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "It's fighting because it knows it's losing," he said, his voice filled with an unwavering conviction. "You're stronger than it now, Adana. It's getting desperate." His faith was a rock, a steadying force against the rising tide of her fear. But deep inside, she could feel a storm gathering on the horizon, a final confrontation brewing. A few days later, Chijioke invited her to a small prayer retreat at his church. He approached the subject carefully, his tone gentle. "Adana," he said quietly, "I don't want to force you into anything, but I believe there are some things that cannot be healed by silence alone. Sometimes, we need a community to help us fight." She hesitated. The word church brought a wave of painful memories. She had avoided places that spoke of curses and deliverance. Too many times she had been singled out, pointed at, told she was possessed or unclean. She had been made to feel like a problem to be solved, not a person to be healed. But something about Chijioke's calm assurance, his unwavering belief in her, gave her a sliver of courage she hadn't known she possessed. That weekend, she went. The retreat center was nestled in the hills, a world away from the noise and chaos of the city. It was quiet, peaceful, filled with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the clean, earthy smell of rain. The people there were different from what she expected. They prayed gently, their voices soft whispers of hope, not loud declarations of war. They spoke of healing as something soft, a gentle unfolding, not a violent exorcism. No one looked at her with pity or suspicion. They just saw her. During one of the evening sessions, as the group prayed quietly together, Adana felt a strange warmth begin in her chest. It was gentle at first, like the first rays of dawn, and then it began to spread, flowing through her veins, reaching every corner of her being. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It felt like something ancient and heavy, a knot of sorrow she had carried for a lifetime, was finally loosening its hold. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. And for the first time in her life, she felt light, unburdened. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was quiet. Chijioke was kneeling beside her, holding her hand. He smiled, not a smile of pride or victory, but one of deep, profound peace. "You're free now, Adana," he said softly. "Not because I prayed, or because they prayed, but because you stopped running." She looked at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. For the first time since she was a little girl, playing under the sun without a care in the world, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole. And though she didn't fully understand the mechanics of what had changed, she knew with absolute certainty that something profound had shifted, not in her body, but in the very fabric of her spirit. The curse had held power over her because she had let it, because she had believed its lies. But its power had shattered the moment love and truth stood side by side to face it. That night, under a quiet sky overflowing with stars, Adana whispered a prayer of her own, a prayer not just for herself, but for others. For all the women who carry unseen thorns, she whispered into the night, "May they find peace as I have found it." And as the wind brushed softly against her skin, like a gentle caress, she knew that the story of her pain had finally, beautifully, become a story of her healing. A few weeks after the retreat, Adana felt lighter than she had ever known. It wasn't just that the nightmares had stopped, or that the cold drafts no longer visited her room. It was that she could finally look at herself in the mirror without flinching, without seeing a monster staring back. She saw only herself, Adana. She was free. For years, she had avoided closeness, hiding her true self behind towering walls built from shame and silence. But now, standing before Chijioke one quiet evening, she realized those walls had crumbled to dust. They sat together in her living room, the air soft with the gentle melody from an old radio. For a long time, neither of them spoke, content in the shared silence. Then Adana took his hand, her own no longer trembling. Her voice was steady, but tender, full of a newfound strength. Chijioke, I'm not afraid anymore. He looked at her quietly, searching her eyes for any flicker of doubt. You're sure? She nodded, tears of gratitude glistening in her lashes. For so long, I thought love was something meant for other people, for the whole and the unbroken. But you were so patient with me. You waited. You never gave up. I think I'm ready to stop running. He smiled gently, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. You don't owe me anything, Adana. Your healing is your own victory. You've already given me the greatest gift by letting me see your heart. She shook her head, a smile of her own blooming on her face. No, Chijioke. I want to give you my whole self. All of me, without fear, without reservation. The words were simple, but for Adana, they were a sacred vow. That night, she reached for the pain that had defined her for so long. She found the source of the thorns, the root of the curse she believed had been placed upon her. And with a breath of pure resolve, she pulled it out. This time, it didn't grow back. A profound and final change had occurred. She was healed, and she was home. Years had passed. The shadows that once haunted Adana's dreams were now only faint memories, echoes of a life she had finally outgrown. She was 38 now, graceful in a quiet way. Her face carried lines of laughter more than sorrow, and her eyes held a calm depth that only those who have survived great storms can wear. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Enugu, a place surrounded by mango trees and quiet mornings. Birds often perched on her windowsill. She liked to think they came just to listen to her hum. Beside her, always, was Chijioke, her husband, her friend, her peace. He was the anchor that held her steady, the gentle hand that reminded her of her own strength. They had married 2 years after that life-changing prayer retreat. Their love story wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, deliberate bloom, like a flower patiently turning towards the sun. It was a love built on trust, healing, and the shared understanding that some battles are won not with a roar, but with a whisper. Time had also mended the rift between Adana and her mother, Ngozi. The years had softened them both, sanding down the sharp edges of pain and misunderstanding. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the veranda, sipping zobo. Mama, Adana said quietly, her voice barely disturbing the tranquil air. Do you ever think about what happened before I was born? Ngozi looked away for a moment, her gaze lost in the distance. The memories were still there, but they no longer held the same power over her. Every day, my daughter, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. But now, when I remember, I don't feel shame. I feel thankful, because you survived it, and because I did too. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, letting the sounds of the approaching night fill the space between them. The chirping of crickets was a soothing soundtrack to their shared moment. Then, Ngozi reached for her daughter's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Do you know why you carried that burden? She asked softly. Adana shook her head, her eyes questioning. Because you were meant to break it, Ngozi said with a conviction that resonated deep within Adana's soul. So no child in this family will ever have to carry it again. Those words settled over Adana like a benediction. It wasn't just about her healing. It was about ending a cycle of pain. She had turned a legacy of thorns into a garden of flowers. That night, she lay in bed, Chijioke's arm wrapped around her. She remembered the turning point, the night that felt like a lifetime ago. It was a night not about proving anything, but about reclaiming everything she had lost, her confidence, her dignity, her freedom to love and be loved without shame. When dawn came that morning, she stood by the window watching the sunrise, feeling utterly renewed. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely human, unbroken. Chijioke had come up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered, Now I know what grace looks like. In the months that followed that transformative night, they began to plan their wedding. A quiet ceremony filled with family, laughter, and joy. Every time Adana looked at her engagement ring, she didn't just see a symbol of love, she saw survival. The curse hadn't been broken by rituals or fear. It had been dismantled by truth, patience, and a love that refused to give up. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and wind-washed, a kind of light that felt like a blessing. The small church at the edge of Enugu was dressed in white fabric and hibiscus flowers. The choir was already humming softly when Adana arrived with her mother. Ngozi held her daughter's hand the entire drive there. "My child," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I used to pray that you would simply survive. Today, I pray that you thrive." Adana smiled, tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. "Mama, I will." Inside the church, people whispered about how calm the bride looked. There was a profound peace about her, not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of a woman who had already fought her greatest battle and won. When the music began and she stepped onto the aisle, Adana saw Chijioke waiting at the altar. His eyes were wet, his smile unshaken. In that moment, every scar she carried, visible and invisible, felt like proof of grace. The ceremony was simple and deeply moving. There were prayers, songs, and vows spoken through tears of joy. And when it was time for Adana to speak, the pastor asked softly, "Would the bride like to say something?" She hesitated for a beat, then nodded. She turned to face the guests, family, friends, and a few who had once only known her as that girl with the curse. Her voice was clear and steady. "Many of you know bits of my story," she began. "For years, I lived in fear of myself, afraid of being touched, afraid of being loved. I thought I was broken beyond repair. But love found me, patient, kind, and unafraid." She looked at Chijioke, her heart in her eyes, then at her mother. "This day is not just a wedding. It's proof that light wins. Whatever pain you carry, whatever shame you hide, you are not the curse. You are the survivor." The hall fell silent. Then, applause erupted, not out of mere politeness, but out of a shared sense of relief, as though her courage had released something in them too. At last, peace has found me. After the reception, Adana and Chijioke drove to a hilltop near their home, where the sunset painted the sky in brilliant gold. He reached for her hand, his touch familiar and grounding. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "when I first saw you, I didn't know what you were fighting. I just knew you were meant to win." She laughed softly, a sound of pure contentment. "And you helped me remember how." They sat in quiet gratitude, the kind that doesn't need many words. Below them, the city lights began to twinkle to life, one by one. Above, the first stars waited patiently for the night to fully arrive. Adana leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of the evening air and the feeling of home. "From thorns to flowers," she whispered. "That's what life does when you let love in." Months after the wedding, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Adana had found peace in small things. Morning prayers with Chijioke, tending her little garden, listening to the laughter that now filled their home. She felt a lightness she had never known, a sense of belonging that warmed her from the inside out. The shadows of her past seemed to fade with each passing sunrise. Then one morning, she woke to a strange stillness within her, a tenderness she hadn't felt before. And before long, the test strip in her hand confirmed it. She was pregnant. She stared at the faint pink line, her heart racing, caught between overwhelming joy and a sudden, sharp fear. "Chijioke," she called softly, tears already welling in her eyes. "I think it's happening." He came running from the kitchen, his face a mix of confusion and concern. He took one look at the test, and his expression melted into pure, unadulterated joy. He wrapped her in a long, tight embrace. "Thank you, God," he whispered into her hair, "for this gift." His happiness was a beacon of light, but deep inside Adana, another voice whispered, old, familiar, and trembling. What if the past had not truly gone? What if the child carried even a trace of the curse she was born with? That ancient fear, the one she thought she had conquered, coiled in the pit of her stomach. That night, long after Chijioke had fallen asleep, Adana lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The moon cast long shadows across the room, and in the silence, her mind drifted back. She remembered the stories her mother used to tell, of the river spirit, of broken promises, of inherited burdens that clung to their family line like a shroud. As her hand rested protectively on her stomach, she whispered a quiet, desperate prayer into the darkness. Please, let my child be free. Let this end with me. For weeks, she carried that fear silently. Every flutter in her womb was a bittersweet sensation, making her both excited and terribly nervous. She prayed constantly, her pleas a constant murmur beneath her breath. She spoke softly to the unborn baby, telling it stories of light, of laughter, of healing. You are not your mother's pain, she would say, rubbing her belly in gentle circles. You are my joy. She was determined to build a fortress of love around this new life, one that no shadow could ever penetrate. When she finally found the courage to tell her mother, Ngozi smiled through tears of joy. She saw the worry etched on Adana's face and took her hands. You worry too much, she said, her voice soft but firm. Don't forget, you broke the chain already. This child will be born in light, not in shadow. Her mother's words were a comfort, a soothing balm on her anxious heart. But still, Adana couldn't fully silence the deep-seated fear. It wasn't until her second ultrasound that the shift truly began. Lying in the cool, quiet hospital room, she heard it, her baby's heartbeat, echoing softly through the speakers. It was steady, strong, alive, a rhythm of pure, unblemished life. In that moment, the persistent hum of fear began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of awe. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the echo of that tiny heart within her own, and a genuine smile spread across her face. You're fine, she whispered to the life inside her. You're perfect. In her final months of pregnancy, she found a new ritual. She would sit under the old mango tree behind their home, watching the sky change colors as evening fell. The world would quiet down, and in that stillness, she felt a connection to something larger than herself. Her hands rested gently on her round belly, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely certain of something. The story that began with fear would end with love. And whatever she gave birth to, a boy or a girl, a legacy of laughter or light, it would never carry the weight she once bore. Because Adana had turned her pain into peace. And peace, once born, can never inherit a curse. The night Adana went into labor, rain was falling softly against the roof. Not a storm, just a steady, cleansing rain. Chijioke rushed her to the hospital, his voice a low, urgent murmur as he prayed aloud while he drove. Adana, though in the grip of intense pain, felt strangely calm. It was a sound so full, so alive, it seemed to echo straight into her heart, shattering the last remnants of her fear. When the nurse placed the tiny, bundled baby in her arms, Adana froze. Not out of fear this time, but out of sheer, overwhelming disbelief. The child's skin was smooth and perfect, her eyes bright and searching. She looked up at her mother as though she already knew her, as though they had been waiting for each other across lifetimes. Tears blurred Adana's vision. She had waited her whole life for this moment, to hold something born entirely of love, completely untouched by the shadows of yesterday. She's beautiful, Chijioke whispered, his voice breaking with emotion as he leaned over them. Yes, Adana said softly, her voice thick with tears as she brushed her daughter's cheek with her fingertip. She's free. When her mother arrived at the hospital the next morning, she held the baby close, her face a picture of pure adoration, and whispered prayers of thanksgiving. This is what grace looks like, Ngozi said, smiling through her own tears. It took us a generation, but the promise has finally been fulfilled. Adana nodded, a profound sense of relief washing over her. For the first time, her heart was completely light. She could feel it. The circle had finally closed, not in bitterness or sorrow, but in absolute peace. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, she sat by the window of her hospital room. The child slept peacefully against her chest, her tiny fingers curled like delicate flower petals. Adana looked down at the perfect face and whispered, "Your name will be Amarachi, God's grace. Because that's what brought you here." And as she spoke those words, the last remnants of the curse, the old fear, the hidden shame, dissolved into the quiet hum of life around her. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. And for the first time, Adana felt certain that her story, born from pain and refined by love, would be remembered not for its sorrow, but for its healing. As the days turned into weeks, Adana and Chijioke settled into the rhythm of parenthood. They would sit by the window in the early mornings, watching the sun rise over the city, and marvel at the tiny being who had brought them so much joy. Amarachi would coo and giggle, her tiny hands waving in the air as if conducting an invisible orchestra of happiness. Her laughter was the sweetest music their home had ever known. Tears filled Adana's eyes, but for the first time, those words didn't feel heavy. They felt like freedom. The weight of generations had been lifted, not by a grand, dramatic event, but by the quiet, persistent power of love and forgiveness. Years later, Adana opened a small counseling center for women. It was a quiet, unassuming place, a sanctuary where people could come and speak about the things they were too afraid to tell anyone else. She called it Thorns to Flowers. There, she listened to others' stories, stories of pain, rejection, and fear, and in return, she told them pieces of her own. Not every detail, just enough to remind them that healing was possible, that brokenness was not the end. No pain lasts forever, she often said, her voice gentle but sure. Some thorns are meant to bloom. Sometimes, on quiet mornings before opening the center, she would stand at her window, watching the sunlight pour across her garden. She would smile softly, remembering the girl who once hid in fear, the woman who found courage in love, and the spirit that once bound her but now slept forever. Her life was not perfect. There were still hard days, moments of doubt, but it was whole. And in that wholeness, Adana had finally found peace. When Adana's mother, Ngozi, visited, she always brought two things: a pot of steaming hot pepper soup and a bag of fresh vegetables from the market. She'd sit with Adana for hours, patiently teaching her the ways of motherhood, sharing stories of her own experiences as a young mother, weaving a bond of wisdom and love between them. The support was a lifeline, a gentle guide through the beautiful chaos of new parenthood. Every evening, Chijioke would come home from work, tired but his face always lighting up the moment he saw them. He'd find Adana and little Amarachi waiting, and without a second thought, he would scoop Amarachi up into his arms, swinging her high above his head until she squealed with pure, unadulterated delight. Adana would just laugh, watching the two of them, and this profound sense of peace would wash over her. It was a simple, perfect moment, repeated day after day. As the months turned into a year, Adana and Chijioke watched Amarachi transform before their very eyes. She began to crawl, her little hands and knees exploring every corner of their home. Then, she started to walk, her tiny feet padding across the floor as she fearlessly navigated this big new world. They would sit with her on the floor, patiently teaching her new words, watching her eyes light up with understanding as she learned to connect sounds to objects. Through it all, Adana felt a deep sense of healing, a feeling of wholeness she hadn't realized she was missing. She knew, deep in her soul, that she had been given a second chance. This was her opportunity to build a new life, a life completely free from the long shadows of the past. When she looked at Amarachi, she didn't just see her daughter. She saw a future bursting with promise, brimming with hope. One evening, as a spectacular sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Adana sat by the window with Amarachi on her lap. They watched as the first stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, like tiny diamonds scattered on dark velvet. A quiet contentment settled over her, a feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. She realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along: a true sense of purpose, a deep sense of belonging. As she gazed down at Amarachi, peacefully nestled in her arms, she knew she had been given the greatest gift imaginable, the gift of love, of life, of grace. She whispered a silent prayer, her heart overflowing with gratitude, thanking God for the incredible gift of her daughter and for this precious chance to start anew. The city outside was finally growing quiet, the usual hustle and bustle fading into a distant, gentle hum of traffic. But inside their small apartment, the air was filled with something else entirely. There was laughter, there was pure joy, and most importantly, there was life in its most vibrant form. In that quiet, love-filled room, Adana knew with absolute certainty that she had found what her heart had been searching for. She had found peace. She had found home. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the beauty of life.